Hi, Alistair. Good evening. Thank you. Yes, I'm William Stockdale. I'm a dispensing optician, contact lens optician. I live and work in Northern Ireland, and recently I became a registered council member at the GOC. So, thank you.
Great, thank you, William. And Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Alistair. Good evening, everybody. My name's Claire Hayes. I'm a dispensing optician and a contact lens optician. I am part of the Fitness to Practice hearing panel. I've been for the last 7 years.
Okay, thank you, Claire. So, Leonie.
Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you all, albeit virtually, and thank you ever so much for joining on this very warm summer evening. My name is Leonie Milliner, and I'm the Chief Executive here at the General Optical Council.
Okay, so thank you, Leonie. Thanks to everyone. So I mentioned just now, that we'd really encourage you to post any questions in the chat. I should also say that Leonie's actually already posted a link to the recruitment pack for this opportunity. So that's easily accessible for you if you'd like to click through to that. And also, I mean, Leonie might want to come onto this later, but there's some tips as well for how to prepare for an interview, which you might find worth looking at too. So so without further ado, if we move on to the first of our questions. So this is for you, Leonie. And really, just to set the scene, could you just explain to us the role of your hearing panel?
I can indeed, Alistair. Thank you ever so much. So, as Alistair has explained, our hearings panel consists of about 40 people, and that's a mixture of lay members, so in other words, non-registrants, and optometrists, dispensing opticians, contact lens opticians. And together that panel brings a different mix of background, skills, knowledge and experience to our fitness to practice decision making and procedures. We're seeking now 10 experienced contact lens opticians, dispensing opticians to join our hearings panel. I just wonder if everyone could make sure that they are on mute, please, because there's quite a lot of feedback and it might be slightly distracting for others on the call this evening. So could you just make sure that you're on mute? So you have that little, there's an icon, a little red sort of microphone icon next to your name or image, and it should have a strike through on it if you're on mute. So if you could just double check you're on mute, that's better. Thank you so much. So what does it mean being a member of our hearings panel? Well, the tasks are twofold, really. First, and more occasionally, hearing panel members are asked to sit as part of a small team to hear what we call registration appeals. And that team forms a committee that's called in our legislation a registration appeals committee. And what this committee does is it hears appeals against decisions that I have made as registrar, whether that's a decision I've made to refuse to register an individual or a body corporate, which is the technical term for businesses that we register. So a refusal to register an individual or a body corporate to the register, or to restore someone to the register after their registration has lapsed. So that's one important section of the business, populating the registration appeals committee. But most of the time, if you were appointed to the hearings panel, you'll sit in our fitness to practice committees, which are generally 5-strong committees, although Claire's going to talk about that in a bit more detail, I think, in a moment. And you have a mix on that committee of lay and registrants. So it's a small team selected from that larger panel. And what does the Fitness to Practice Committee do? Well, it listens to evidence and it determines allegations relating to the fitness to practice of optometrists and dispensing opticians, the fitness of business registrants to carry on business, and the fitness of student registrants to undertake training either as an optometrist or a dispensing optician. And some allegations might only take a day to hear, and some might take a week or 10 days. So those panels do vary. And hearings panels also do something very important in terms of public protection. So they will determine whether it's necessary if an interim measure needs to be put in place, for example, to suspend a registrant or to put certain conditions around that registrant's practice whilst an investigation is ongoing. But at its very heart, as we explained in the recruitment pack, and there's a link in the chat function which takes you straight to that recruitment pack on the GOC website, at its heart, as a member of the panel, your role is to ensure that the public is protected and that the decisions that you make collectively as a panel are in the public interest.
Right, thank you, Leonie. So that's a really good introduction to this evening and gives you a good sense, I hope, of the role which the panel performs. So yeah, with that in mind, perhaps we'll turn to you, William, now. And you mentioned already actually that you've joined the GOC Council as a registrant member earlier this year. So I mean, perhaps you could tell us, what was your motivation? What were you thinking when you put your application in, and why would you encourage others to get involved with the GOC?
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I was probably going through this process 6-7 months ago. It was September, October of last year. So I was doing exactly what hopefully the 100 odd people on tonight are doing currently. I probably had two big motivations. During COVID, I was chair of Optometry Northern Ireland, which put me in a position of trying to ensure that service continued for the public, that we were able to keep practices open, able to keep practitioners safe, and continue to deliver safe care through the early days of COVID. It was difficult, it was challenging, it was all the things that you would expect, but it was also great fun. And in some ways I feel bad saying that, because you shouldn't say that part of COVID was great fun, but actually being able to work with the health board to develop services at that time, work with the GOC actually from the other side of the fence was fantastic and brilliant, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. You got to see what you could actually do in terms of delivering for the public. So moving on to the GOC, that's exactly the same thing that you can do. My second reason for applying to the GOC, and I hope Leonie doesn't shout at me, was completely 100% selfish and complete self-interest. It is hugely developmental. I started my life in optics as a glazing technician and enjoyed that. I worked for Boots and I had the opportunity to train as a dispensing optician and then a CLO, which I did. I was a manager with Boots, and over probably 12 years, I enjoyed huge development with a company. 25 years ago, I set up my own business. And again, all of the things that I'd learned along the way massively benefited me. Over the 25 years, if you look back, the world has changed so much. When I started, I didn't have a mobile phone. Really, they were an absolute luxury. Facebook hadn't been invented. And that slightly depresses me, because I was 5 years into my business before Facebook came along. And Mark Zuckerberg has done much better than I've done in the last 23 years. But it's just incredible that that didn't exist in 1999 when I was starting the business. So the world moves very quickly. Today, I'm sitting using ChatGPT to write articles and to write internet content, website content. So this is moving very fast and will continue to move very fast. And I think we all have to continue to learn, develop, and get as much knowledge from any source we can. The GOC is the perfect opportunity for that. You get to work with people who are incredibly intelligent, incredibly dedicated, incredibly good at what they do. And I learn every day. Every time I interact, I learn something from the people I interact with. So it's a fantastic opportunity for anybody, both to serve the public, to serve the profession, and to develop themselves. So I would encourage everybody and anybody to apply for this role.
Okay, thanks, William. So if you were wavering before joining this webinar, hopefully William has persuaded you that this is absolutely a good role to apply for. And thanks for your sort of very personal and sort of honest account of what encourage you to join the GOC. So as you were saying, a chance to protect the public, and it's about maintaining confidence in the profession as well, but also something in it for you, a chance to further develop, building on all the other things you've done in your career. So thank you, William. And I'll turn now to Claire. So Claire being a representative of the hearing panel. And I think I'll start by saying that fortunately, most GOC registrants, probably the overwhelming majority, never get an experience of a fitness to practice hearing, which is obviously a good thing. So Claire, could you just bring it to life for us? What does a hearing actually involve? What goes on, and what part do you play as a member of the panel?
Thank you, Alice. I think that's a really good question. The whole process can be quite daunting for registrants who have to face the hearings process, and the committee and the GOC do their very best to make the whole experience less daunting for the registrants as possible. So a complaint will come in and it will go through the case examiners, and the case examiners will decide that it needs to go for a full hearing or whatever the reasons. There's lots of work that goes in the back of house to get the case ready for it to come to the committee, and it can take many months for this to happen. The case will then come to the committee and we will have a meeting, and depending on what kind of case it is, will depend on how many people sit on the committee itself. Now, for a lot of the hearings, it's 5 members of the committee, so there will be 2 dispensing opticians and 3 lay members, and one of those lay members will be the chairman. And there'll also be a legal advisor. Now, the legal advisor is incredibly valuable. They play no part in the hearing at all, but they're where the committee gets its legal advice from. So it's that legal advice that kind of keeps us on the right track, make sure that we are considering case law, that we are making sure that our decisions are transparent. The hearing will commence, both parties hopefully will be represented. The GOC always has a representative, and hopefully the registrant will as well. They don't always. Sometimes they represent themselves, and sometimes the registrant doesn't attend at all. So there's lots of variables that can happen within these meetings. The representatives will then present both sides of their arguments, and then the committee will hear evidence. Evidence can be from whoever is relevant, whoever is involved, or whoever is a witness to what is happening. We hear all sorts of different cases, and no 2 cases are the same. Some cases, as we said, can take a day, some can take a week, some can take longer, and you can't always predict how those cases are going to look. So we'll be in a room if it's face-to-face, or if it's virtual for the online as it is now. And we'll hear from each of the parties. We will then make a decision on the facts of the case. So that's the first part. We make a decision based on the facts, based on the evidence. Once that decision is made, we then decide whether or not that decision means that the registrant is impaired. Now, it's possible that all of the facts are found proven, but it amounts to not an impairment. And this is where it can be quite useful for the registrant sometimes, that several months have gone by from when the allegations made to when the case is heard. Because then what can happen is so much time can go by, the registrant may have made changes to the practice that they're no longer considered to be impaired. So whilst we look at it on surface and we think that delay can be quite harsh, that delay actually can be a benefit sometimes. Once the decision is made on impairment, if the registrant is found to be impaired, we then hear from the representatives again. We hear supporting evidence, character witnesses, character statements, etc. And we then decide on what the appropriate sanction would be. Now, there's a wide range of sanctions. I won't go through them all. They're all in the case received, and we deliver our final view. It is incredibly important that every decision we make is based on the evidence that is given to us. And it's incredibly important that our decisions are documented accurately and fully, so that the document that's produced at the end, which can be available to the public to read, gives an overview and it gives a very clear show of our reasoning, how we've made that decision. Because it has to be transparent. Everything we do has to be transparent. And it also will be reviewed by the HSPC or by Crown Court, depending on what happens next. So it's incredibly important that our decisions are well represented. Everybody on the committee has a say. Every voice is heard. The chairmen work incredibly hard to ensure that the process runs logically and fairly for the registrants, and that all the points of view from the registrant and from the committee are heard before a decision is made. And that committee is unbiased, and that committee is made of a wide range of people, and that wide range of people have very different points. So some of the discussions we have are very interesting. It is not unheard of for an opinion to change partway through the discussion. And that's important. It's important that any member of the committee is flexible in their thinking and is willing to take it as they go along, depending on the evidence.
Great. Okay.
I think that's enough for me for now.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So, I mean, as you've explained, there's a really clear process that you follow, and you don't have to be a legal expert. The panel receives advice from a lawyer, so that makes sure that the panel's operating within the legal framework and doing things by the book. And you mentioned the variety of different cases. I mean, could you say a bit more about that? I mean, there might be cases involving misconduct or questions about someone's professional competence. So could you tell us a bit more about the types of cases?
Absolutely. Now, for dispensing opticians, the cases around competency are very few and far between. Most of the cases that we see for dispensing opticians are not to do with their ability to practice usually. It's often to do with things around dishonesty or their actions within their private life. So, for instance, it might be a case of theft. It might be fraudulent NHS claims. Around domestic violence and stalking. We've had cases of child pornography. We've had violence. So it was one gentleman was actually in prison at the registration. They can be incredibly diverse. We get the very sad ones as well, where it's a mental health issue that is affecting the registrant's ability to practice. Because obviously we also have to consider health reasons.
Thank you, Claire. So I'll just pause there. I think the microphone isn't giving us great sound quality, so I don't know if there's anything you can do to improve that. But I think you've.
Apologies, I'll come closer.
that would be better. Yeah. Yeah. So that's helpful. Is there anything you wanted to add to what you were saying there about the different cases? I mean, you've obviously.
The only thing I would add is that each case is unique.
Yeah.
And the set of circumstances that lead the registrant to a hearing is unique. And I think it's very important that the committee goes into every single one with an open mind. You cannot prejudge anything. It's very often that the information you get changes completely what you think the case is going to be about going in.
Great. Okay. So I think you've really highlighted the fact that there's very careful consideration of all the cases and all the evidence, and it's really important that there's good discussion among the panel members. People have an open mind before reaching a decision. So thank you for that. And I think if you could make sure you stay close to the microphone. I think people have been struggling with the sound quality a bit. So thank you. So we'll move on to the next question, and question for you, Leonie. So looking at the the recruitment pack, that sets out the essential criteria for the role, the things that you're looking for people to demonstrate. And one of those essential criteria is a demonstrable commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion. And I know the GOC itself as an organisation has made a strong commitment to EDI. So could you perhaps just talk about how the GOC has put that into practice, please?
I can indeed, Alistair, and we have made significant investments recently around EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. If you go onto the link in the chat to the hearings pack, you'll see the criteria, the selection criteria for the role. And the second of the essential criteria, so that demonstrates precisely how important EDI matters are to us as the regulator, is around applicants' ability to be able to demonstrate their commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion. And I'll just read out the second part of that, that selection criteria. It's about dealing with people and issues honestly, fairly and with respect. And this is one of the essential criteria that we will be selecting candidates to interview and to appoint. And so I would advise in preparing your application for you to consider how you might demonstrate that you meet this criteria. How has equality, diversity and inclusion informed your work and your professional practice? And I think what would be really helpful in the application form, which is also available on the link that I've just posted, is to think about describing one or two examples from your professional life, or indeed voluntary activity that you might engage with, where EDI might have shaped a decision or changed the way that you have worked in some particular way, for example, in the services that you provide in your professional practice. And I know sometimes it can be quite difficult to think of a very specific example when filling out application forms. So do bear in mind that you can also draw on things that might have shaped your professional practice or your volunteering in other parts of your life. So for example, if you have served as a school governor or perhaps as a volunteer or engaged in a local community or sports group, perhaps there might be an example there about how a consideration of an EDI issue might have shaped that work. But more broadly, as a regulator, we were absolutely delighted that our long-standing achievements on the EDI front have been recognised by our oversight regulator, so an organisation called the Professional Standards Authority, who inspects us on an annual basis. In their most recent report, they highlighted our achievements as an organisation in relation to our commitment to EDI in all aspects of our business. So you can be assured that should you be appointed to the panel, we will provide training and support for you in relation to EDI and help you develop your practice as a hearing panel member in making sure that you are aware of bias, for example, in your decision making, and that you can deal with issues at hand as we've described in the pack, so honestly, fairly and impartially. I just want to check that everyone can hear me. Okay, I can see some nods, so I'm hoping everyone can hear me. And I'll just respond to the one question I've just seen in the chat. No, we're not members of Stonewall. We do have a member of staff internally who's responsible for EDI, and all of our members, from our council members, committee members, hearing panel members, are regularly trained in EDI matters, and we have a programme of engagement on topical issues on EDI right across the business that hearing panel members and others can engage in from time to time.
Great. So well, thank you, Leonie. That was a really comprehensive answer, and I think as well as talking about the GOC's work in this area, you've given some good tips for people as to how they might demonstrate their own commitment to EDI. It's good to see quite a few questions appearing in the chat, and I can see that people are keen to actually click through and see the recruitment pack. That's actually the first link, so if you go all the way to the beginning of the chat, you'll find that link there. That's something Leonie posted right at the start. So hopefully you can find your way to that. Yeah, I mean, there's one question I've seen which is about the time involved with the role, but that actually feeds into the next question for Claire. Any questions we don't cover in the course of the discussion, we'll come back to at the end. But I'll turn to you, Claire, just to talk about the time commitment. So we've, it's clear that this is a part-time role. So the idea is that registrants can combine it with their other work, their other activities. But could you give us a sense of, what time commitment is involved and how flexible is it?
Absolutely. Time commitment wise, it's not as much as you think it's going to be. Several reasons for that. One, there's a lot of DO members, fortunately, and hopefully they'll see me some more. And also we see less cases involving DOs than we do optoms. So the need is less. Now, time commitment is as much or as little as you want it to be. Every week or so, the GOC will send out a call for availability for people who can sit on hearings. Now, we generally ask that you're available to sit, I think it's for a minimum of 20 days a year. Rarely will you use those full 20 days per year. I think I averaged on any one year between 10 and 12 days, and I tend to choose the longer cases because that suits my lifestyle. People I know, other people tend to choose cases that only last for a day. So you can choose what cases. So the dates are given to you in advance. You can look at your diary and you can see what works for you. What will often happen as well is there'll often be last minute calls go out as well for various reasons. People might be conflicted or whatever. I work full time as well. And I do this and it works. I'm able to fit my committee responsibilities into my day-to-day job. And it works very well for me. I'm quite lucky, my employer is quite flexible. But what you'll often find with employers as well is they will like the fact that you're involved in the hearings process, that you're involved with the GOC. Employers like that engagement in your industry, with your regulator. And it actually helps with your communication with your patients. So employers, there's often a buy-in from employers to support you to do this. So it does work quite well. I have had no problems fitting it in.
Okay, well that's really helpful, Claire. And it does sound as if there's, a great deal of flexibility really as to, what dates you offer, whether you offer single days or blocks of time. So hopefully that's valuable for people to know. And I think you've also highlighted the fact that this can be seen by employers as a really good thing and something that certainly your employer has been willing to support, and hopefully other people would have the same experience. So yeah, thank you for that, Claire. And I'll go back to William now. So this is turning to the actual recruitment process. And question, William, what tips would you give someone who's wanting to apply beyond don't miss the closing date, which I think is this Sunday, if I'm right? So over to you, William. Tips for people thinking of applying.
Thanks, Alistair. You've taken my tip number one.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No, you're fine. Yeah, midnight Sunday night, and there's a chance if you're going to be applying, you'll still be working at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock Sunday night to get your application in. There's still 5 days between now and Sunday. So if you've submitted an application, fantastic. If you're halfway through submitting, keep going at it, keep working. And if you haven't started, it's fine. You still have five nights and a few days in between. So get an application in. That's for definite. If you've tuned in tonight, you obviously have an interest. So put that forward and get your application in. It's a slightly different application. In fact, it's a totally different application than if you want to get a post in a practice as a dispensing optician CLO. This is purely competency based. So there you need to understand what a competency based application and then interview is. I watched YouTube videos, and there's some really good YouTube videos that will help. I know Leonie posted some tips at the start again of the feed. That's really good. It is pointless to put an application in if you don't put it in the right format. So look at the tips, look at it on YouTube, and get the structure in your mind first. It's based around a STAR model, which is sort of situation, task, action, result, and possibly even reflection, if you want to put a second R onto it. So you want to take any of the competencies. You've got 7 competencies there to cover. Take one, take the EDI one, and look at what was the situation that you want to describe. What was the task that you were then involved in? What actions did you take? That should be probably the largest part. And then what was the result? Again, to go beyond that, what did you learn from it? What was your reflection? So that should be your structure to every one of the 7 competencies. And it's really, really important. You only have 300 words. That's not a lot. And when it comes to the interview, you will have maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes in these. So again, it's not a lot of time. You have to be really succinct. So get your example first and then fit it into that model. If you know anybody that works in the civil service that has that type of a background, ask them for help. That is the biggest obstacle you have to overcome, is applying in a different way. Probably between now and Sunday, you will feel like not bothering, giving up, pushing it to one side, watching TV and thinking this isn't for me. Do that, take a break, have a coffee, come back to it and start again. You will get there by Sunday night. So I think that's the number one for applying. Make sure you do and fit it to that structure. If you get invited to an interview, again, your interview will be based on those competencies and based on the same format that you've applied. So make sure you've got that in your head. Read around the GOC website, read around general government websites. You want to look at things like standards in public life, the Nolan principles. These are the things that govern how the GOC operate, how the hearing panel operates. So you want to have those in the back of your mind, and then you can weave those in. The interview will be a panel interview. I think there's 3 people on the panel. That, again, can feel like an odd situation. The panel are there to support you. They're going to ask questions, but they want you to do well. They want to encourage you. They want to support you. They want you to be successful. So again, approach it from that point of view, and make sure you put your own personality into it. Hopefully we're not looking for just rote answers. We're looking for a personality, for somebody who can work around problems, who can think, who can possibly respond off the hoof. So get your application in by midnight on Sunday night. Keep working at it. There is lots of help out there. All of us are probably approachable between now and Sunday. I don't mind if anybody approaches me. Albedo have been fantastic through the last couple of competitions and have supported this very, very well. And even though this one finishes on Sunday night, there will be other competitions in the coming years for the same positions. So this could be a learning process for the next one, but work at it, stick to the structure and get your application in.
Great, thank you, William. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully all the people on the panel tonight have proved once and for all that the GOC does have a human face, and the people on the panel will be the same, and we'll want to make sure you are able to demonstrate the full range of your experience and the skills that you have. Worth saying as well, actually, that on this occasion there are 10 vacancies for the hearings panel, so it really is worth putting the time in and being persistent and meeting that deadline. So yeah, some good tips from William there, and Leonie, I think, has reposted the link to the advice on the government website, and yeah, there's lots of information about that STAR framework that you talked about, William. So yeah, some really valuable advice there. So I'm going to turn now to Leonie for a final few questions, and then we'll go to the other questions that have come up in the chat. So thank you, William. And Leonie, Yeah, well, could you tell us a bit about the support that new members of the hearing panel receive? So, what support and training is on offer?
So thank you, Alistair. It's really important that when you're appointed to the panel, we give you plenty of support and advice so that you can get to grips with your role and feel confident when you step into your first fitness to practice committee meeting or registration appeals committee meeting. So you'll see in the recruitment pack that when the recruitment process is concluded and you've been appointed to the panel, the induction programme will start on the 4th of September. I'm aware that some people still might be on holiday then, so the team are very happy to flex around people's availability and dates. So that initial recruitment induction process is tailored for this particular role and will involve a number of meet and greet sessions and online standard programs for EDI, information governance, etc. You'll then have an opportunity to join in an annual member development day, which for this year, and get your diaries out please, it's the 15th of September. So it would be great if you're appointed, if you can be available on the 15th of September. Really good opportunity for you to meet the hearings team, GOC staff, as well as your fellow hearing panel members. And then as you develop in your role, you'll have regular one-to-one check-ins, and we have a dedicated governance team and hearings team who are there to support and advise you and answer any questions that you might have as you develop in your role. We really want everyone on this call to apply. So please, if you do have any questions about the application pack, if you're struggling to find it, or download the application form, there is an email address that you can, to our governance team, that you can use to seek some advice, or indeed get in touch with me directly, or with Alistair at Abdo. I'm sure you'll be able to point people in the right direction as well, Alistair. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Alistair.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Leonie. Yes, and just to answer a question that came up in the chat, we are recording the event. We'll send a link to that recording to everyone who's signed up for the webinar. So thank you for that. And I'll also share my email address in case anyone would like to get in touch with me for some help with their application. I think we've talked about the closing date already, Sunday 19th of June, but would you just like to say a few final words really about the application process, just to remind people what they need to do to apply, and what happens after that?
So I'm just going to give a little correction there, Alistair. It's Sunday the 18th of June, midnight. That's quite all right. I'll just say that again. Sunday the 18th of June. So to apply, I would urge you to please read the candidate pack on our website, and the link that I've posted several times in the chat there takes you straight to the GOC website, where you'll be able to download the candidate pack. So read that really carefully first, and then you'll find an application form. That's the second link on the website page that I've sent you to. So download that form. It's a Word document. And what you need to send us is a copy of your CV, a filled out application form, and I would urge you to fill out every single box. It's a 300-word limit to each box, so it's not great essays, but there is something about writing succinctly sometimes that can be quite difficult, so don't leave it to the last moment. And then there's an EDI monitoring form, and I just want to mention that in a little bit more detail, if I may, Alistair. The EDI information form is really valuable from our perspective, because our oversight regulator requires us to collect EDI statistics on who are our hearing panel members, who are our staff, who are our council members, in order for us to be able to analyse those statistics sort of on a cohort level. That form is detached as soon as it's received. It's detached from your application form and your CV, so the team never see it, and it's stored and collated separately, so it's completely anonymous. So you can be very confident in giving us and filling out that EDI data and giving us those details. I've just seen a question in the chat, Alistair. It's midnight on Sunday, so do try not to leave it to the last minute. Now the application form might seem daunting, but what we're asking you to do is just give 1 or 2 brief examples of how you meet each of those criteria. William's just described how to do that in a little bit more detail. Plenty of resources out there, and it's important that those are practical examples that come from either your professional life or your voluntary experience. And what we do is we look at the first the essential criteria. There are just 4 of those, and then if there are candidates with a similar evidence and skill mix at the shortlisting stage, we'll then go to the desirable criteria, and we'll use the evidence that you supply for the desirable criteria to begin to rank applicants. It's really important that you address both the essential and the desirable criteria in your application pack. If you're selected for interview, you'll hear from us by the 17th of July. And the interviews will be taking place remotely for the week commencing the 24th of July. So hopefully that gives you some assurance that even if you've got a little bit of annual leave, then if you've got a decent internet connection, you should be able to connect for that interview, which will be at the most an hour long. The interview panel is Mike Galvin, who is a lay council member, sits alongside William on our governing council, and Catherine Kimpton, who's a current dispensing optician member of our hearings panel, and Nick Yeo, who's an expert in recruitment and is our independent member of our nominations committee that oversees, from a governance perspective, this recruitment process. We will take references on appointment, and we do also do a series of due diligence checks. Might sound slightly daunting, but we do things like look at your social media outputs. We do a Google search, and we do some other due diligence checks. They're all outlined in the application pack, so do have a look at that. Somebody has asked about how you can find out a little bit more about hearings. In the recruitment pack, there is a link that takes you to our website, which gives you details of hearings that you might like to observe. So I would say, if you are shortlisted for interview, do spend an hour or 2 just listening in as an observer to a public hearing, because that will give you a really good idea if this is something that you would like to do by seeing it in practice. And of course, it's something that you can talk about if needed in the interview itself. I just wanted to say a couple of things about our support as well. Claire mentioned earlier about our fantastic lay chairs who chair our fitness to practice committees. What we try and do is we buddy those chairs up with new appointees to the hearings panel members, and we do also provide, as part of our annual training for all of our hearing panel members, including registrants, a case law update, so that you can stay at the forefront of the field, so to speak. Alistair, I saw a question earlier on in the chat about where allegations come from. Should I just address that very quickly?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so somebody asked where, how are FTP allegations initiated, and generally those allegations come to us either from patients or from members of the public directly. Very occasionally, allegations can come to us via a university, particularly for registrants who are students, and allegations also come to us from colleagues in practice, either registrants or other workplace colleagues. So that's where allegations are generally initiated to us, for us to investigate.
Right, thank you, Leonie. So I think you've covered a lot of ground there, and hopefully given people a really good sense of the process and what to expect. So thank you for that. I'll just try now to cover the other questions that people have raised in the chat. So there's a really interesting one, which is about artificial intelligence, something that William touched on earlier. So I'll turn to Claire first, and then you might want to add your thoughts, Leonie. So the question was, has the role of AI, the fact that that's being used in practice, has that affected the amount of hearings or perhaps the amount of complaints that you receive? So any thoughts on that, Claire?
That's a good question, and it's one I can't really answer, I don't think. I don't think it's impacted anything as yet, because we're still having the complaints filtering through that's probably made 12 months ago and so forth, and AI is moving incredibly quickly, and it will have an impact, but I'm not seeing it as yet.
Right.
Yes, and I could just let everyone know that we haven't received any complaints yet about the use of artificial intelligence. But what I can tell you is that our education committee met on Monday morning, and the education committee discussed a paper which considered the impact of artificial intelligence in the education of dispensing opticians and optometrists. That was written in part by ChatGPT. Is that ChatGPT, which was quite an extraordinary, which shows sort of how new this technology is, even for me. You know, it was the most extraordinary paper because it was logical, coherent, and the parts that have been written by artificial intelligence were really quite stimulating. And you know, the committee had a great time debating the sort of the consequences of that, the use of that technology in, say, assessment, marking, plagiarism, and those sorts of aspects. But it hasn't come through an FTP yet.
Okay, but something you'll be keeping a close eye on, I'm sure. So, okay, so there's a question which is about the time commitment, and I think you did cover this earlier, Claire, but I'll just go through the question, and there might be some nuances here that it'd be worth coming back to. So the question goes as follows. So the position is for a relatively small number of days per year. How much notice is given for cases to plan this around other work commitments? And then some cases are a day long, some are longer. And you know, what dictates that? Is that about the amount of evidence, or I suppose the question really is, would you know at the outset how long it's going to take, or could it last longer than expected? So could you try and respond to that, please?
So the answer to that is yes to both. Generally, we know how long is allocated for a case. When the request goes out for availability, there are dates, and it usually tells you, well, it does tell you how many dates are required. You may not be used for all of those dates. Sometimes hearings end early, but that's the amount of time the GOC anticipates that the case will last for. And that can be based on the complexity of the case, the nature of the complaint, the evidence, how many witnesses may be given evidence, how much paperwork is involved and how much you have to go through during the hearing. But it is also possible that that case will take longer than you have planned for. And we call those cases part heard. And what would happen then is that case would be, some days will be booked for that case further down the line. So you'd come back and revisit the rest of the information that you haven't completed for that case. You get a lot of notice. You know, some of these cases, some of these hearings are planned a year in advance. You know, I've agreed to do things before now, 6, 8, 9 months in advance. So you get plenty of notice. There are the odd occasions where life happens and for whatever reason, the panel is short of a member and an emergency call will go out. But even then, you normally get a couple of weeks notice.
Okay, so normally you'd be asked for your availability for cases that are coming up quite a few months in advance, so plenty of notice.
Yes.
And then your point about cases that take longer than expected, so cases that are part heard, it's not the case that, you know, it's not the position that the case was booked for a day, it takes longer, so everyone has to stay the next day as well. It will be adjourned, and you know, so you won't be all of a sudden expected to spend longer on a hearing than you anticipated.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. If you're booked for 3 days, that is how long you will take. If the case runs over, then you will be coming back at a later date to be determined when it's convenient for all of the panel and the advocates and the registrant to get together. And that can take quite a bit of planning, but there is no expectation that you will stay any extra days than what you have agreed to do.
Great. Okay. Well, hopefully that's reassuring for people.
Could I chip in here, Alistair? Would that be possible? Just with a little bit more information, because we have been working really hard recently to reduce the number of cases that go part heard. And I think in the last quarter we had no heard cases, so the cases were concluded in the time allotted to the panel, which I think is really excellent for all parties involved. We're also investing in developing a case management system which will help us manage the cases better and give more notice to panel members about when they might be available, and ensures that their time is utilised effectively. But one thing that we have noticed is that I think because of our threshold criteria for progressing cases through the system, is that those cases that come to a fitness to practice committee tend to take longer now than they used to. So it's generally 3 to 4 days and up to 15 days. And the length of time is determined, as Claire said, by the amount of witnesses and the volume of evidence. But we have case management meetings beforehand internally between the parties before the committee sits that try to sort of accurately determine how long that period of time might be.
Great. Okay, so a lot of work goes into trying to make sure that those estimates are accurate and cases don't take longer than expected. So thank you, Leonie. So just a couple more questions before we close. So there's a question about connecting with other GOC members, and so I mean, let's assume that's members of the hearing panel, but perhaps wider members of the sort of GOC council or others. So yeah, what scope is there for connecting with those people? I think really to support people's personal development or their career development. Do you want to tackle that, Leonie?
I can indeed. I think one of the, and perhaps Claire will be able to speak to this better than I can, but I think one of the lovely things about the hearing panel member is because it's a large panel of 40 or so folk, the committees that you serve on will always change. They'll be different. You'll be working with different colleagues each time. So that's a great way to make connections and to grow and learn from each other. The panel itself comes together at least once a year, so you'll be able to meet everybody in that context and GOC staff. And we're also working across the board on what we call member support. And one of those projects is called our Optical Practice Familiarisation Programme. So all of our members, our council members, committee members, hearing panel members and staff, and a category of people called workers. So they're people like our education visitor panelists, the people who go and visit and inspect universities. We're bringing colleagues from all of those different groups together in small groups to visit optical practices online and face-to-face right across the United Kingdom, in order that we can share our knowledge, grow our knowledge about the optical sector. And we've had some brilliant visits to prisons, to optical services being delivered in domiciliary care, in homeless centres, in rural practices, urban practices, etc., large multiples and independents. But those particular visits are great because of the activity, but also the opportunity that actually you meet half a dozen colleagues who are working right across the organisation, and that's a really good example of way we're growing and developing. And we have a number of other sort of cross-cutting events, EDI type focus type events as well, which give an opportunity to meet colleagues. There's also a question in the chat, Alistair, about location. I think the question is something like, do all the hearings take place in London? And the answer to that question is quite simple. About 90% of our hearings take place online, so it's done in this sort of remote context. And about 10% of our hearing days are in London at our offices at the GOC. And if you have to come to London, we do pay your travelling expenses and your overnight accommodation, and we have a small allowance for subsistence, so evening meal, breakfast, etc. There is a link in the application pack to our expenses policy. I have to say, because it's our registrants' fees that pay for this, it's not overly generous, so you won't be travelling first class or staying in a Swiss hotel, but it'll be reasonable and you will be comfortable. But it's worthwhile looking at our members' expenses, which is paid on top of the day fee that we also pay for being a hearing panel member.
Okay, thanks, Leonie. So I think that was the final question in the chat. But just coming back to you, Clara, in terms of your experience of being part of the panel and getting to know other members and learning from them, I mean, how's it been for you?
It's been a wonderful experience. Every single session you sit, you learn something. There are, as you say, there are so many members of the panel. You see so many different people. You learn something and you get a different perspective from each one of those. And that is invaluable. And that is probably one of the greatest strengths of the panels and the system that we have. You meet new people, you make connections. Optics is a small world, which everybody on this meeting will know. And, you know, you see the same faces over and over again when you go to meetings and so forth. But this is quite useful because not only are you seeing other optical professionals, you're seeing the lay members as well. And the lay members add an extra dimension to things. You know, they come from all different walks of life. They might have been lawyers, barristers, they might have been doctors, police officers, prison officers, all different sorts of people you will meet. And they will have a very different perspective or a different set of expertise that is so useful. And you learn something and you make those connections as you go along.
Thank you, Claire. So good to hear that you've had such a positive experience of being part of the panel. So thank you for that. I'll just turn to William now to ask if you have any final last words. We just have a minute left. So William, any final thoughts from you?
I think it's all been said. And just to echo what Leonie and Claire said, you do get to meet so many people. And as Claire said, from different walks of life. And it is brilliant. There's virtual coffee mornings. There's different ways in which you do meet. And it is so developmental. As a registrant, sometimes you can have an opinion of the GOC if you're just a registrant. To have actually been within it for 6 months, it completely changes your opinion of what it is, how it operates, its motivation, and its commitment to delivering for the public and for the profession. So I think anybody that joins will thoroughly enjoy it and will get a huge amount from it.
Thank you, William. So thank you to all the panel, to William, Claire and Leonie for joining us tonight. Thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar. I hope it has really inspired you to submit your application and given you lots of really valuable information to enable you to do that. We will circulate a link to the recording, and we'll also provide the link to the recruitment pack just in case anyone still needs that. I'll just turn to Leonie just for the last word. Anything you would like to say in closing, Leonie?
I would encourage you to apply. Very excited that you were all able to join this evening. And I'd really like to thank Abdo for organising this evening's webinar. Really, really helpful example of the professional body and the regulator working well together for the professions and the public's benefit. I'd really like to thank Claire and William as well for your support this evening. It's been really, really valuable. If you have any questions, I've popped the email address appointments at optical.org in the chat, so just ask our governance team any questions that you might have. Sorry, Alistair, I know time is pressing. There was one question about references in the chat there, and please do pop your references at the bottom of your CV, but don't worry if you forget to do that, because the governance team will pick that up with you directly if you're selected for appointment and take up your references at that point.
Great, thank you, Leonie. Thanks everyone. Hope you found the session useful. Get your applications in, and on that note, I will say good evening, and yeah, thanks for joining us. Bye for now.